It is my distinct pleasure to introduce to you this morning Jeff Duncan, our Congressman. He's a South Carolina native, Clemson graduate, divide and conquer, brother. Prior to being elected to the U.S. House of Representatives, he was the president and CEO of J. Duncan Associates, a South Carolina-based real estate auction firm. Duncan was a member of our South Carolina House from 2002 to 2012. Elected to the 112th Congress in 2010, he currently serves as our representative, and we are proud of him. We thank him, we respect and honor him today, and thank him for the stand that he takes in Washington, D.C. on behalf of all of us here in South Carolina. Will you make welcome, a Cross Point welcome to Congressman Jeff Duncan.
Thank you. Thank you. Wow. I tell you what, I am blessed already from this service and the music that I saw and the children that were singing. And I think Gresham spoke last year and he stood up here and said, wow, y'all are going to really change this Baptist. I'm Baptist too. I tell you what, I love the Lord. And what I saw is a bunch of others that love the Lord here today. So amen to that and amen to the service. I just want to start out just telling you a little bit about me, because I know some of the people in the room, but I don't know all of you, and you don't know me. And I'm your representative, so I want you to know that I love the Lord. And we do some pastor lunches around the district. And we try to have a lunch to meet the pastors and talk with them about Congress, talk about the nation, and talk to them about their congregations and pray together. And it's a fabulous experience for me. But one thing I've done is I've shared my testimony with them. And I'd like to share just a little bit of that with you this morning. I was saved. I accepted Jesus Christ into my heart in 1972 in Asheville, North Carolina, the Baptist church there. And I was telling this story to the pastors, I think it was in Easley. And I said, you know, I didn't have this Damascus Road experience where a guy blinded me by the light and really jerked a knot in me and changed my life that much, because I came from a Christian home. Mom and Dad were Christian, God-fearing people. They drugged me to church when I was young, so to speak, and so we went to church, and I don't know if it was a strong youth pastor or the minister there in 1972 in Asheville that led me to the Lord, but I accepted Jesus as my Savior. I was baptized there in that church, and then I went back home, and I continued to live a Christian life like I had been living prior to that. And so I didn't have this Damascus Road experience, and I told that story up in Easley, and we sat down to eat lunch before I went on and spoke about things going on in Washington. And there was a pastor from Dacusville, and he sat across from me. He said, Jeff, never apologize for not having a Damascus Road experience. He said, you had an Emmaus Road experience. And I had just come from Israel right before that. And I said, well, Pastor, I was just on the Emmaus Road, and I read in Luke, I think it's Luke chapter 24, I read about the Emmaus Road and what happened. Y'all know the story. Let me share it with you real quick. But Christ was crucified. He was put in a tomb, and he was resurrected. This is on about the third or fourth day, and a couple of his disciples were walking from Jerusalem on this road that goes to Emmaus. It's about 7 miles out of Jerusalem over to Emmaus. And so they're walking along, and they're talking about the things that just happened, because they were followers of Christ. They were disciples, and they said, you know, our Savior, who we thought was the Messiah, and they in their mind, I believe, thought was going to be a true king, right? And so they're talking about what was going on as they're walking home on the Emmaus Road, and all of a sudden someone joined them. And he said, what is it y'all are talking about so animatedly as you walk along this road? And they stopped, and they were sad. And they looked at him and said, are you the only one in all of Jerusalem that doesn't know what happened over this weekend, these last 3 days, that Jesus, the prophet, many thought was the Messiah and all that, was crucified? He was given up and crucified, and he was buried, and some of our friends, his followers, went to the tomb today, and his body wasn't there, and he's resurrected, and he's reappeared. Y'all know the story, and they're saying, are you the only guy in all of Jerusalem that doesn't know what happened? And so they walked along the road, And he started to share with them the scriptures that were fulfilled by the events of that weekend. And they get a little bit further down the road, and they come to a house, and it's getting to be evening, and they say, "Sir, why don't you come in? It's getting to be dark, and come in and have dinner with us and spend the night." And so he did. And while they were sitting at the table, he took the bread and broke it. And then it was revealed to them that that was Christ that had been walking along with them. And then he disappeared. And they said, "Were our hearts not burning as he walked along, sharing the scripture with us, telling us what we already knew, but we were denying or forgetting? Were our hearts not burning with that understanding?" Do our hearts not burn, guys, sometimes when we forget our way? And so the pastor told me from Dacusville, sitting there that day, he said, "Jeff, you didn't have a Damascus Road experience. You had an Emmaus Road experience." And I said, "Well, Pastor, I know the story and all that." I said, "How do you mean?" He said, "Christ was with you all along. You just didn't recognize him." I recognize him now. I recognize him now. And so it's an honor to be in your church worshiping with you this morning. You know, we're here before the Memorial Day holiday tomorrow, and we're going to recognize and all the first responders, the law enforcement, the emergency technicians, and all the soldiers and sailors and airmen and Marines, men and women that serve in uniform protecting our freedoms, that we're lifting up tomorrow, and we're remembering the sacrifices that they make. But one of my former congressional colleagues and former Army Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, he once said this. He said that since 1971, Memorial Day has been the unofficial start of the summer, with barbecues, blockbuster movie openings, and mattress sales. I don't know where the mattress sales thing came from, right? But that's what he said. So, much like the pageantry that goes along with Christmas, sometimes we get so caught up in the Memorial Day festivities that we forget the reason for the season. We're going to focus on barbecues and getting together, but we start to forget why we celebrate Memorial Day. In this case, we come together to honor and remember those who are no longer with us, those who have sacrificed so that we may be free. Now, all year long, we're encouraged to carry that Christmas spirit with us. You hear that during the Christmas time, that we need to have that Christmas spirit of love for our fellow man, and understanding that Christ, baby Jesus, came to the world to save us. And we should keep in our hearts year-round the appreciation for Christmas. But when we think about Memorial Day, we should keep in our hearts all year long the appreciation for the men and women that serve. The men and women that are serving our nation's military, standing on that wall, defending our freedoms, whether it's here at home in the National Guard or in Afghanistan or Iraq or the Philippines or wherever they may serve. We're supposed to remember that, and we need to remember that not just on Memorial Day, not just on Veterans Day, but every day. Every day. And so whether that uniform is the uniform of a soldier, a police officer, or a first responder, we need to remember that. As I was preparing for this morning's comments, I was thinking about what we saw on the screen just a minute ago, Boston. And those first responders, there were a lot of people running away from the bombing, fleeing the scene, getting away from that danger, running from harm's way. But we had men and women in uniform, policemen, first responders, EMTs, firemen. But there were some National Guardsmen guarding there in their BDUs and their uniforms. They were running toward the bomb. They were running to help their fellow man. They were running to try to secure the area, make sure there wasn't another bomb or another threat to the free Americans. They weren't running away. They were running into the danger. That's what they do every day. And then we saw in there Oklahoma. What a tragedy. The tornado was over a mile wide and ran for 17 miles. The destruction and death and damage is unbelievable. But something else happened on the day of the Boston bombing that we missed, and it wasn't on the screen today, but West Texas. West Texas, a gas plant exploded. A number of people died. Let me tell you about West Texas. There was a fire in a gas plant, dangerous natural gas. Volunteer firemen, first responders ran into that plant. They started fighting that fire and suppressing that and trying to stop the gas so that the people, the workers in that plant, could get out. So the firemen are fighting this fire and they're securing the area so that the workers, the civilians, could get out of the premises. And then it exploded. And the loss of life were the first responders, the volunteers that helped save those other Americans. We're forgetting that because Boston overshadowed it. It was a terrorist attack on the nation. but we had first responders, volunteers that lost their lives in West Texas. Mark 6:4 says this. Jesus says to his disciples, "A prophet is not without honor except in his own town, among his relatives, and in his own home." Now think about that. Now let's change that word prophet, and let's put soldier, or let's put hero, or let's put fireman, or let's put police officer. Is not without honor except at home. We think about the New York Fire Department, the New York Police Department, or the Oklahoma City bombing folks, or the Boston bombing heroes that we talked about a minute. But do we think about these guys that are sitting here? Because you know what? They're wearing the same uniforms. They're doing the same thing, and they're protecting us. Amen. They're the heroes. They're the heroes that are not without honor. We think about those guys other places. We think about these soldiers that are standing on the wall in Afghanistan, but we got National Guardsmen here in town that when we see, we need to thank them for their service. We need to thank John Skipper for his service. We need to thank all the fire folks and all for their service, because we forget about them. We forget about them when we think about the heroes in other places. They're wearing the same uniform, and we got the same caliber of men and women right here. You know, I mentioned earlier, Memorial Day is often associated with summer blockbusters. We've got Iron Man 3 out now. Last year, about this time, I think the last Batman movie came out. And in a few weeks, we're going to have another Superman movie. What's that? Superman 5 or something, but I don't think they're using a number. But we've had a lot of them. These movies are popular because as a society, we admire the heroes. And we want to see them on the big screen. We admire those who are quick to put others before themselves and don't hesitate to rush in and save the day. But pushing the distractions away, we remember that you don't have to have superpowers or a red cape to be a hero. The true heroes are in this room today. They're wearing uniforms. But there are a lot of folks that I see and I saw stood up a while ago that wore the uniform. They don't have it on today, but they wore it before. And they need thanks. They need our thanks and our love and our appreciation. So thank you guys that I saw stand up earlier. The sergeant back here in uniform. Thank you guys that are serving our nation. But you know what? They don't get to be the professionals that they are. You guys don't get to be the fireman, the fire chief, and the sheriff, and the EMT officers without a lot of training, right? Y'all do training all the time. We saw some training on the screen a minute ago. I asked Rick, I said, can you still do those pull-ups or run across those logs? He said, maybe in a younger year I could have. I don't think I could. I'm way out of shape. I played football at Clemson maybe back then, but I don't know. They do a lot of training. Training, qualification, requalification, more training. It takes a lot of that to know how to put out a fire or respond to an accident or apply emergency medical techniques to save a life or to solve a crime. It takes a lot of training. I went out to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center the other day and saw the weapons range where they train. I saw a mock-up of a house floor in Washington where the Capitol Hill Police and the Secret Service can train in an actual setting. We went out on the driving course and they did some Starsky and Hutch maneuvers out there with me in the car that kind of freaked me out a little bit. But I don't think I want to drive like that myself or be with anybody else that's driving. Luckily, they're professionals, but you get a lot of training. Let me share with you, I heard from Jensen Franklin. He's an evangelist from Georgia, and I heard one of his podcasts. That's a good thing about iPhones. You download podcasts, and I can get a sermon anytime I want to on an airplane when I'm flying to Washington or driving down the road. And Jensen Franklin said this. He said he was talking about Moses. And so Moses, he was taken from the water, and he was raised in the Pharaoh's court, and he was a prince of Egypt, right? He had a silver spoon in his mouth. But as he grew older, he started to understand his Hebrew upbringing. And so one day he saw a Hebrew slave, worker, being beaten by an Egyptian. And it enraged him to see one of his fellow men being beaten that way. And the story goes, he ended up killing the Egyptian. He killed the Egyptian, and he didn't hide from the fact that he did that, but he fled. And he fled to the desert for 40 years. So he was out in the desert for 40 years, and was he just out there hiding out so that maybe the police from Egypt didn't come find him and arrest him and throw him in prison? And no. You know what he was doing out there? You know what God was using Moses during that 40 years? You know what he was doing? He was training. He was training because while he was in the desert, he learned every trail. He learned where every water hole was. He learned what snakes are poisonous and what snakes aren't. He learned how to deal with a scorpion bite. Because guess what? 40 years later, he was going to lead 2.5 million people into that same desert, into that wilderness. And he was going to lead them out of that bondage that they had in Egypt. So that training that God put him through, 40 years of training so that he could show them how to survive. Because they were looking to him as the leader. He went through training. You guys go through training. Military goes through training. I know you get tired of it, but we appreciate it because you are the professionals that you are. Moses in the desert, a great story to think about when we're thinking about the law enforcement folks and the military that are training. This morning and tomorrow, we're going to pause as we are and remember all that served. Whether they served in Baghdad or on Bunker Hill, or whether it was in the jungles of Vietnam or on the beaches of Normandy, or whether it was in Panmunjom or Fallujah, Luzon, Iwo Jima, Mogadishu, or Kandahar, or right here in hometown like Anderson, South Carolina. We owe you guys, military and law enforcement, first responders, firefighters, we owe you for our safety, our security, and our freedom. These heroes are the ones that follow Christ's example, who put others before themselves as they seek to serve others. And I'm reminded as I was preparing this, Matthew 20:28, when it said, even as the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Jesus came to serve, not to be served by anybody. He didn't want to be a king. He is the King of Kings, but he didn't want to be held up that way. He came to serve and show us how to serve. A few weeks ago, I attended a funeral for Private First Class Barrett Austin from Pickens County. Died in Afghanistan. Wounded in Afghanistan, died in Germany in the hospital. Like many of the patriots that came before him, Barrett was a young man. Barrett was 20 years old. 20 years old. Had been married for 3 months. But he had with him a desire to serve his country and protect you and me against those who wish to destroy our way of life here in this nation. He gave his life doing that. And during the ceremony at Rock Springs Baptist Church, the Army general that was there went down front to where Barrett's wife of 3 months and his parents sat. And he knelt before them and he presented them Barrett's medals that he earned on the battlefield and through his service and ultimately given his life. Presented each of them the medals. And then shortly after that, the pastor got up and he preached the sermon or service for the funeral. And he said, I just witnessed the general giving the medals to Barrett's mom and dad and his wife. He said, but on April 21st, when Barrett departed this world, Christ gave him his crown, and it was full of jewels for all the service that Barrett had done, the people he had led to Christ in this country. Barrett was a true testimony, and he's got jewels in his crown in heaven. Not presented by a general, but presented by the King of Kings, Jesus Christ. It was an amazing moment for me. People gave their lives to Christ right there at that funeral for a fallen hero. I'll never forget it. And while I wish very much that Barrett could still be with us, there are 3 ways we can honor him and we can honor the sacrifice of all the others. And these are these 3 things. I've written them down. We can take care of their families. Let's take care of their families. Let's tell their families they're loved. And let's invite them to church and let's embrace them. And let them understand that their son, daughter, husband, wife, their sacrifice wasn't in vain. And for all of our veterans that return home from the battlefield, we can honor them and thank them the way we're doing this morning. Thank you, guys. If you stood up earlier, thank you once again. I can't say it enough. I can't say thank you enough for all you guys do for us. Second thing we can do is we can just continue to honor their memory with Memorial Day and Veterans Day and all the things that we do in this country, but we should do it daily. And the third thing is we can work together to guard our freedom, which they made the ultimate sacrifice to defend and protect. Folks, it isn't easy to serve in Washington. I do wear a suit, not a uniform, but I'm away from family, fighting some fights. My life isn't in jeopardy, but I appreciate the prayers that come from this church. I appreciate the prayers that come from this community. And I'm concerned I'm concerned at how this country has seemed to turn away from God. But you know what? God hadn't turned away from us. He's standing there with open arms. We got to remember that. But our country seems to have turned away from God, but it hadn't always been that way. The nation's capital in its inception at the very beginning was used as a church. And many of the early presidents attended worship service on Sunday morning in the nation's capital. In the heart of the capital, just off the rotunda, the dome that sits on top of the Capitol. It's called the rotunda inside, and just off the rotunda in a nondescript door. It's like that door right there. It doesn't have a name on it, just has a number because it's a Capitol room, so it has a number. But it's a chapel. It's called the Members' Chapel, and you hadn't heard about it. It's not in the press, but it's there. And if you come to Washington to visit me and you contact us, and either I or my staff, I would love to personally share that room with you. And we'll go in that room and we'll kneel in prayer and we'll share the word and we'll talk, and I can meet with the families of fallen heroes or people that are suffering, or I can go in there quietly by myself and pray like I've done oftentimes. But in that room there is a beautiful piece of stained glass. Now it's backlit. It's not lit by the sunlight, but it's backlit. I shared it with y'all, didn't I? And this beautiful piece of stained glass depicts George Washington. And George Washington's doing the original Tebow. He's kneeling in prayer. And that's how his men and the people that served under him when he was president of the United States, that's how they often saw him kneeling in prayer, seeking guidance from above for all the decisions, whether they were minor or major, in his life. He went first to God to find out how God wanted him to direct his soldiers, to direct his life, to direct this nation at its very inception. As he presided over the Constitutional Congress, I'll guarantee George Washington prayed about it. And he's seen on that stained glass to remind me and others that go into that chapel that I want to show you one day. It shows George Washington kneeling in prayer. And right above that is Psalm 16:1. Psalm 16:1. Preserve me, O God, for in thee do I put my trust. That's where our nation's motto comes from. In God we trust. Preserve me, O God, for in thee, not in myself, not in Pastor King, not in the deacon body, not in Sheriff Skipper, but in thee, God, do I put my trust. That's where our trust needs to lay. That's where it needs to return to. And I'm so thankful that I'm reminded by that stained glass and by that verse in Psalm 16:1. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk this morning to you. Thank you guys for service, whether it's EMT, fire, police, or military. Thank you. Thank you, first responders. Thank you that are currently serving in the United States military, that are standing on that wall for what you do. Thank you, moms and dads and wives and brothers and sisters and others that are serving them back home by taking care of business while they're away, so their minds aren't on the rent or on the power or on the children being raised. They're focused on preserving me and this Constitution I carry in my pocket and all of us. And to the men and women that have served, that are in this room, thank you. Thank you so much. And to those who have fallen, we haven't forgotten them. We're going to honor them with a whole day tomorrow that will reflect on those that have served and given their ultimate sacrifice, just like our Christ did on that cross for us when he shed his blood, the redeeming blood, and went to the tomb. But he's not in the tomb. That tomb's empty. I've seen it. I've seen the empty tomb, and I know my Christ lives today. He lives today and gives me the promise of everlasting life. Thank you so much. God bless you, and may God continue to bless the United States of America. Thank you.
Amen. Put your hands together one more time. Come on. Thank you so very much for being here. Thank you, Congressman, for those words.